Well, Admiral, I thank you so much for joining the podcast. Admiral
Great to
Mark
be here.
Harnitchek, you are you're one of my heroes,
Oh, well, thank you.
and more than that, you're a 3-star Navy admiral, retired now for 10 years. Just really quickly for our listeners, before retiring, you were the head of the Defense Logistics Agency, which had a $30 billion plus budget and was responsible for all logistics for all
Yeah.
of the armed
Yep.
forces.
Yep.
Before that, you worked as deputy commander of the U.S. Transportation Command,
Hmm.
and then you've served in a variety of sea tours, including 2 submarines, as well as the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt. And
Correct.
so,
Yep.
a long and incredible career serving our country,
Hmm.
particularly in the space of logistics. Um, so, Admiral, if you're ready, I want to just jump in with questions.
Sure. Go
Um,
ahead.
and I'm wondering if you can maybe start with, so you've led massive complex organizations, but I want to just start small. When you were a young officer on a submarine,
Hmm.
I wonder kind of what the first real leadership lesson you learned was back when you were on a sub.
Yeah. It was probably 1978 or 1979. It's sort of not the height of the Cold War, but the Cold War was pretty hot then. And I was on something called a fleet ballistic missile submarine. So we have two kinds of submarines in the Navy. They're all nuclear powered. Uh, the fleet ballistic missile submarine is the one that carries the nuclear missiles that are targeted at our adversaries, and then the other ones are fast attack submarines, right? So I was on a fleet ballistic missile submarine, and our ships were forward deployed to Scotland of all places. We had two crews on the submarine, so it stayed at sea for the maximum amount of time. It was probably those submarines were probably at sea, I would say, 70 to 75% of the year.
Wow.
And the things I learned was that when you're involved in nuclear power and nuclear weapons, um, the tolerance for mistakes is pretty slender. I mean, there's not a lot of gray. There's a right way to do things, and there's a not right way to do things, right? So you really have to pay attention to small details.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I learned. I also learned how to work really, really hard. Because when you were on the ship, you were just gutting it out. And then your downtime was when you flew back to the States and the other crew had the submarine. Um, so you spent a lot of time just sort of learning the ropes, learning the sort of Navy routine. Um, and again, you are working in a culture that is compliant, 100% compliant to all sort of the kind of the rules of the road and how you operate a nuclear submarine with nuclear weapons on it. So I
If you're
spent a
not,
lot of time.
you start World War III. If you're
Yeah,
not,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So we would when we would leave port, we would do something called you go on alert, which means you're part of the sort of the strategic forces. You're a small cog in this big sort of triad of nuclear weapons. You have the Air Force that flew the bombers at the time, and that they were B-52s, and then they had a massive network of ground-based ballistic missiles out in the middle of nowhere, no North Dakota, Montana, and then so that was two legs, and we were the third leg of sort of the triad. Probably we didn't have the most hitting power because we were not few, but relatively few compared to the Air Force. But we carried 16 ballistic missiles, and they had their multiple reentry warheads. And you'd go out and you'd get all your targeting, and guys would load that up, and you would stay as stealthy as you possibly could in sort of not well traveled parts of the ocean. So your mission was to stay undetected, and if you got the word to come up to your launch depth and release those nuclear weapons. And it was for me, I mean, looking back on that, I'm not sure why we didn't seem to worry about it, but we didn't.
Mhm.
Maybe
All right.
because sort of the outcome of that was so horrible, your sort of brain sort of shielded you from that. But boy, when you think what could have happened, but we were ready to do it. I mean, I have no doubt that had we got the word, we would have launched those missiles at wherever they were going, and you know keep our fingers crossed that there was something to come home to. So you had to qualify to, drive the ship as the officer of the deck. Um, and so that also took a lot of time. And so I learned how to pay attention to small details because if you didn't, I think my captain told me this. He said, one of my captains on that first submarine, he said, Mark, there's a reason they say the devil is in the details. And he hides there because that's where people rarely look, you know. And he was a model for that. In fact, he just passed away. His name was Larry Marsh. He ultimately retired as a 2-star, but he was a fanatic about small things. So all through the deployment, he would inspect a compartment, and he would start in the torpedo room and go all the way back aft to the reduction gear in the engine room. And he would take hours to do that. He
Mm.
would put his coveralls on and he would crawl everywhere and come up with a list of these. We never had any big discrepancies, but we had lots of little ones. And so what I learned from that after I got sort of over, why is this guy worrying about there's a little grommet missing in the doors of one of the supply lockers, But he was a fanatic about that, and he expected people to just pay attention. And that's one of the big things that I learned from him. Um, I also learned how to sort of lead people that perhaps weren't, how do I want to put it? When you have, I mean, I loved my cooks, um, but your cooks are on display 4 times a day,
Yeah.
and everybody has an opinion about the food. And when you're on a submarine, there's really, that's really the only variety that you have is other than standing watch, sleeping, and eating. So everybody always had something to say about the food. And so I paid a lot of attention to ensure that, we were doing simple things like scrambling eggs the right way. I had one young guy from Texas who couldn't make a grilled cheese. So and my lead cook was left a little to be desired about holding people to standards. So we had to work together on how to do that. And I didn't know how to do it. I wanted to sort of be everybody's friend, like most young officers do. And and you can do that, but there comes a time when you have to sort of tell people what the standards are and expect them to live up to it.
Yeah, Admiral,
Uh,
you're a 3-star admiral now, but how old were you then when you're on
I
a
was
ship,
probably 23, maybe 23.
23 years old,
Yeah,
on a submarine,
yeah, yeah.
getting the nuclear weapons?
Yep, yep.
Unbelievable.
The other thing I would tell you is, if you're in the Navy, you are part of being a naval officer is being a watchstander, right? And anybody will tell you that who goes on ships or submarines, and that is a tremendous responsibility. Um,
What does that mean for
well,
the
so when you're on a submarine and you're underway, um, the guy or the gal that is sort of not driving the ship but in command of the safe operation of the ship is called the officer of the deck, right? And that's sort of the lead watchstander when you're underway. And sometimes you're standing watch at night when everybody's asleep, um, and the captain expects you at a minimum to sort of safely, operate the ship, i.e., don't run aground, don't run into anything, and when you're on patrol in a submarine, don't get detected.
Mm.
Right? If you're taking the ship to periscope depth, you have to do that safely. So it was a big focus on paying attention to little things. Um, and I did, because at the time, and I did another submarine tour after that, I was always a very humble watchstander. I always thought that, not that I was about to do something wrong, but I could, right? Because I had friends that had gotten in collisions on submarines.
Mm.
A very good friend of mine was on a submarine in Norfolk and they were leaving port and they got in a collision. And instead of thinking, well, that'll never happen to me,
Yeah.
I would often think to myself, there by the grace of God go I, that could very easily have been me. So I always had that sort of thought in the back of my mind. And sometimes when the officer of the deck, it gets very busy on a submarine. You have a lot of contacts, either on the surface or operating submerged that you need to kind of get through. So if I was ever feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the sort of the operational, picture, I would always ask for help. I would always call the XO and ask him to come into control, just to give me sort of a second, set of eyeballs to look at, whatever the tactical situation was to make sure I was making the right decisions.
I would imagine that took a lot of humility, especially as a 23-year-old who wants to have it all together.
I guess so. But, I learned that, none of this, popped into my mind because some superior intellect. It just came from watching other people who I just had a sense always did it right.
Yeah.
you know. And then the other thing is that the commanders I had on that submarine and the executive officer, the engineer, and I was the most junior department head. If you're the supply officer on a submarine, you're the most junior department head. And these guys always had sort of a sixth sense about if things weren't going quite right or they were about to go wrong. And you get that just by being self-aware, by
Mm.
paying really close attention to little things, right? I remember one time the XO was not in the control room, but he could hear, in maybe the back of his mind that we were doing a lot of talking about, contacts, right? And
And what
he just walked into the control room and said, "Mark, how's it going? Um,
mm,
how's the contact situation?" And I explained it to him, and he said, "Okay, you got it." So there was that, right? And that's a big part of being a naval officer. So when you hear about, in Seventh Fleet they had a string of destroyer and cruiser collisions,
yeah.
that's because, it's never because of one thing. It's sort of a succession of errors that result in, if you're an aviator, a plane crash or
Mhm.
some sort of mishap or a collision or a grounding on a ship. So, the reason I'm harping on that is that's something that served me throughout my career.
Yeah.
You don't have to do all the details, but you need to make sure that you find the little devils that are hiding in there.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
And I would tell you and I did 2 submarine tours in a row, so I was on submarine duty for about 60 months straight, and it was just a blast. It was, professionally rewarding, fun. We met great people, crazy people. I had one sailor, a third class petty officer. Yeah, I still remember his name. His name was Mike Gronsky, and he was from the Bronx. And he was sort of the prototypical work hard, play hard sailor. He was the guy that would be out all night drinking and then up at, 4:30 in the morning to cook breakfast. And
Oh
he was
my
a great
gosh.
cook. He was fabulous. But we had enough of these situations where I sort of, looked the other way or took things into consideration until I finally realized, if we don't get this guy some help, he's
Mm.
gonna have a wreck. He's gonna kill himself, kill somebody else, or drink himself to death. And so we put him in a rehab program, which he didn't like at all. And then I left the ship. And the next time I heard about him had to be, I want to say 20 years later. And he had retired as a master chief.
Wow.
And so he, you know,
Wow. You made
got
it.
all cleaned up
You made it.
and again, but I didn't make that decision all alone. I had lots of help on that because had, I not had some of that help, he may have not made it.
Yeah.
But, and they're the things that you remember, those episodes, but it was just, in fact, you
It's
could
an
say my
interesting
entire
balance that you
career.
just struck of paying attention to the smallest detail, but
Yeah.
also really caring about people. And a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
leaders
Yeah.
do
You
that.
have to do that. People talk about you're focused on the mission and I don't disagree with that. But what I have found is that, if you take care of your people, and I mean, really take care of them, set very high expectations from them, but ensure that, that they know that you care about what happens to them. You know who their families are. You know what the kids' birthdays are. You take an interest in them. You talk to them. The mission just takes care of itself.
Mm.
It just does. It always does. For me, anyway.
Yeah.
And I did it for 38 years. So that's a good long haul of,
That's amazing.
yeah. And plus, if you don't know your people very well, that's half the fun.
Mm.
It's just knowing your people, right? And they're great, great people. Wonderful, wonderful.
Admiral, you said a second ago that some of the cooks on the submarine didn't scramble the eggs right. How do you scramble eggs right?
Um,
What's the right way?
you don't put eggshells in them. Um, there's no black parts of a scrambled
Oh,
egg.
okay.
And I'm thinking of one, this poor guy from Texas, and yeah, he had a tough time, and I don't know what happened to him because I left. I was with him for about a year, and then I left, and I hope he and it wasn't for lack of trying. you know, I mean, you know, he would have been the type of guy that would have been, somebody has to be the guy that swabs the floors and digs ditches, and that's probably what he was most capable of, and what he would have been most happy doing.
Yeah. So
Not adverse to hard work, but really just not equipped to think a whole lot. But a great kid, great kid.
I'm sure there have been a few folks along the way who've said the same thing about
Yeah,
me.
but I have to tell you, when you have great cooks, and I've been blessed, I would say my toughest time with cooks was the first half of my first tour, and
Why?
it was exciting 4 times a day.
It was exciting, and but
Oh, it
not
was
in
very, and
not in a
I don't
good
mean
way.
exciting in a good way. You know.
Is there a
um,
meal that stands out in
oh
particular?
yeah. Well, we had a lunch where I had to pitch in and make grilled cheeses because this guy couldn't quite figure out how to get those done either.
So
Yeah,
if you're on a
yeah.
submarine and you're making eggs, are you cracking real eggs?
Yes, you are. You are. So
Nope.
typically when you go to sea on a submarine, our patrols were about 70 to 75 days. And you had to have everything for all 70, everything from toilet paper to chemicals to everything, right? So you would load the submarine full of food, and you didn't never had enough freezer or refrigerated space to carry milk and vegetables. So you would turn your refrigeration unit into a freezer, and so you'd have 2 freezers, and you would carry frozen meat and frozen fish and all that sort of stuff. But
Okay.
the one thing you could carry that was fresh were eggs. So typically on a fleet ballistic missile submarine, you were operating in the far north. So very often you'd be operating above the Arctic Circle. And even when you weren't, the North Atlantic never gets very warm. So
Yeah.
when you're, submerged 200, 300 feet, the water temperature is probably between 30 and 40 degrees. So what we would do is we would get big boxes that carried, I'm trying to think how many, they carried, I don't know, 24 dozen eggs or something, right? And we had, I don't know, enough eggs to feed, 120 people every day for 70 days. And we would put them in the bilges on the submarine. And bilges are basically, it's the part of the hull that's under the decks.
Yeah.
And because the deck was steel, that third 40-degree temperature would come through the hull and keep the eggs fresh. So the eggs were just as fresh on day 75 as they were on day one.
That is unbelievable.
Now, I don't know if submarines do that now, but that's how we did it back in the war, so to speak.
That, that's incredible.
But that was all we had that was fresh. Yep.
Unbelievable. So you've talked a little bit about what you learned then as a
Hmm.
leader that you took with you, and I'm wondering, sort of flipping the coin a little bit, um, what leader had the biggest impact on you and why?
Well, let me give you two real quick. I'm a great observer of leaders, and I have found that really good officers do that. You observe leaders your entire career, and you never stop learning about what to do, and then perhaps not what to do. And I had, as a relatively young guy, probably with it between 15 and 20 years in, I worked for a succession of flag officers, 2 or 3, that never looked like they were having a good time. You know, anger was always right below the surface.
Yeah.
Yelling at people was a common occurrence. Um, I guess I don't know what would you call that? You'd probably call that a toxic work environment. And then
Yeah.
that's perhaps an overstatement. And in fact, one of the guys who I had some admiration for, who was that way, um, he talked about that one time, and he didn't call it a toxic work environment. He said that people function better in an atmosphere of healthy anxiety. So I'll never forget that. I often liken that to if you were a professional football player and Vince Lombardi was your coach. This guy would have been my boss as, a Navy 2-star as a Vince Lombardi.
Sure.
Fiercely competitive, smart, hardworking. But, he believed that you'd get the most out of people by, yelling at them or
Mm,
embarrassing them or
mm,
making them feel bad, you
yeah.
know. Um, and then I had another guy who just wouldn't even allow that what his leadership style was. And to my point about never looking like you're having a good time, when you're a flag officer, I mean, you have made it.
Yeah,
That's sort of and there's a lot more guys that could be flag officers than they have flag officer spots.
sure.
So it's not that you're any better than everybody else. You just happen to be at the right place and the right time and take advantage of your opportunities. So I was always very thankful that I was where I was. So what I took from those guys is sort of the good parts, attention to detail, setting the big vision, right?
Yeah.
Be able to communicate what it is that you want done very clearly to your people, and then sort of monitoring how that was going, right? And so I took that on board, but the stuff that I left behind was the anger,
Mm,
that penchant to always be on a really short fuse.
mm,
And these were officers that were probably of my father's generation,
yeah.
who would come up in pretty tough times, maybe not served in the Second World War, but had served in Vietnam and maybe Korea before that.
Hmm.
And that I don't want to say that was commonplace, but I saw it enough to be able to sort of it was fairly commonplace,
And so for
you know.
the admiral who that you mentioned at the top, who created what might be a toxic work environment now, what did you take from him?
Um, I took he communicated sort of gave you great feedback in sort of weird ways.
Mm,
I mean, the old euphemism that the reward for a job well done is no punishment probably fits well for him. But of the two that I worked for, I liked him the most. I mean, I sort of understood him.
yeah.
That if he was he was just a tough customer. I remember one time me and another I was a lieutenant commander then. Me and another guy, a great friend of mine. Our people had really kind of screwed something up.
Mm,
And it wasn't the end of the world, right? But it was a thing, and it was a thing that he paid attention to. He paid attention to everything. So he got us in his office, and what I noticed was the people between me and him were nowhere to be found. So I worked for a commander who worked for a captain. They weren't there, and my colleagues, his chain of command wasn't there either. So this admiral just, I mean, he gave us a good hiding for a good 20 minutes. And by the end of it, it was like a mouse, a cat with a trapped mouse, just sort of batting us around a little bit. And he was
yeah.
laughing and we weren't laughing. And so I thought we got out of there alive. And the next day he called me back and he gave me a little more.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Twice in
So
a row.
that perhaps was not his or my finest hour, but Um, and then the other guy was just a sort of a humorless guy,
Mm,
you know, and he's
okay.
the guy that you never got any positive feedback from, you know. So I guess I reconciled when what I found was I was becoming like them,
Huh.
short fused, raising my voice, and I just had an epiphany sometime that I'm having too much fun to ever get angry, or impatient.
To
Now that
become.
doesn't mean that you can't have high standards and be very demanding.
Yeah.
But if you're a leader of a big, well, any organization, frankly, but especially a big one, you have to look like you're having fun.
Yeah.
There's a Navy 3-star. His name is Jim Stavridis.
Hmm.
Very successful guy, prolific author, great intellect, written a lot of books. He was the Southcom commander and then the UCOM commander. And one of the things that he wrote, and I don't remember where he wrote it, but he talked about that. And I think what he said is, and I'm going to get this wrong, um, that you're like a mirror, so you get back from people what it is that you show them. So if you're upbeat, optimistic, happy, look
Yeah.
like you're having fun,
Yeah.
take a genuine concern in not just the mission, but your people, that's what you get back from them.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw that at Transcom, but
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to serve you as a military contractor,
yeah,
just in full disclosure for the podcast. And I did see that. I remember there was a time when there was a time when I was wearing a seersucker suit
Right.
to the office, and I did not have the right white buck shoes. And I will never forget I happened to be outside of your office speaking with your scheduler, and you came out of your office, you picked up a really ugly pen off of your scheduler's desk, and you kind of just walked past me and flipped it at me and said, "Jonathan, here's a cheesy pen to go with your cheesy shoes." And you kept on walking. And I laughed really hard, and I think that was the intent. It was a little
Yeah.
rip.
Oh, it was. It was.
Uh,
It was.
and but it humanized you, made me. I was naturally, fairly intimidated by you as a three-star admiral.
Yeah.
But it humanized you, and it made it fun to come to work. And I look forward to sort of,
Yeah.
those moments where
We had a lot of fun. We did.
yeah,
We did.
you're
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. We did some big things.
you did
So
some big
so
things. So talk about that.
let me just give you the sort of the good side of that. And I'll
Yeah,
just refer back to and I really, throughout my career, 38 years, um, I worked for some great people. I never had a bad job. And even the leaders that I learned a lot of what not to do from, they
yeah,
were very, very rewarding tours that I took a lot from. But I would say one of the best leaders I ever worked for was General McNabb, who, as you
General.
know, was the
Yeah,
commander of
yeah.
Transcom when we were there. And I worked for him twice.
Hmm.
And I probably, I always paid attention to how he led people. And you remember him. I mean, he
Yeah, yeah.
was exactly the sort of model leader that I sort of tried to model myself after. You know, he always looked like he was having a good time, zero ego, you know, uh, very focused on the warfighter, um, as professional as they come, insistence on very high standards, fully empowered the workforce, fully empowered the workforce. I mean, he set out a very clear vision of what we were going to go do. And then he gave people the resources and the leadership authority to just make it happen. He did. He did.
So
So I learned
let's
a lot from him.
you sort of fast forward through your time on a submarine and on
Yeah.
the Air Force, the aircraft carrier, and you've become an admiral, and you're
Right.
in leadership roles managing logistics and sustainment for U.S. troops during Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom
Right.
in
Right.
Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I wonder, tell us about sort of what it took to keep those warfighters, as you rightly call them, alive, fed, housed. And then we'll get into the surges in both Iraq and Afghanistan. But let's just sort of start with the basics.
Yeah. It was, well, first of all, we had a miraculously fabulous partnership between our service components, Military Seal of Command, Air Mobility Command, and then the Army component, the Surface Distribution and Deployment Center. And our fourth component was probably the game changer, and that was commercial industry.
Mm,
So, and when the situation was just normal,
hmm.
I mean, it worked pretty well. And by the time I got to Transcom in 2006, when I was the J5, we were doing pretty well. We were in a rhythm. We had been at war for about 3 years. We had sort of the coming and going in a rhythm. The issues very often were um, anticipating what you're going to do when the next thing goes wrong, and you never knew what that was. So for us, it was the IED threat,
Yeah.
right? And all of the sort of kinetics that the bad guys were subjecting us to in Iraq. So the way that you would fix that there is as much as you possibly could, we would get as much sustainment as we could, out of off the ground and up in the air. So
Mm.
we made colossal use of not just organic airlift but commercial airlift. So I think we probably doubled or tripled that when I was there. And
As
all
a
it took
way of
was money.
keeping troops off the road, basically, so they would
Well,
avoid IED.
troops never traveled on the road. The only thing that traveled on the road was the sustainment. So if you were moving around Iraq, typically you never drove anywhere; you flew.
Hmm.
Right. So that was never an issue. But as much as you possibly could, we would try to get as much sustainment as we possibly could up in the air and off the ground, because it was completely permissive up in the air as opposed to on the ground. So to the extent that we could. Um, And the other thing was, we always had more stuff to move than we had capacity to move it. And the capacity problem was largely coming through Kuwait. We just didn't have, enough industry and really enough soldiers to escort them. So one of the things that we did was, we worked pretty hard to get the Iraqi port of Qasr open. So that gave us not one seaport, but two, and then use commercial trucks and commercial contractors to guard the convoys. So we were always, you got to focus on the big thing, right? And if the big thing is um, folks up in Iraq are running out of things, you got to figure out how to get them their things faster and in greater quantities.
Yeah.
And you can always do that, you know. You just got to think about it,
So
and
that's
they're
a
the things
perfect
that we
segue.
did. So another one was we had, when I was there, we finally got the mine resistant ambush protected vehicles from the States, and they
Yep.
showed up probably in great quantities in December of 2007. So instead of, escorting convoys in up armor Humvees with flat bottoms, we had these purpose built vehicles that would protect the troops inside from IED blasts. But of course, we had literally hundreds of them. And once again, the constraint was, how do we get them all north?
Yeah.
So I had an Air Force lieutenant colonel working for me and said, Admiral, why don't we just fly them all? And these are big things. These are monsters, right? And of course, we were oversubscribed organically. So the C-17s that we had some of, and some amount of C-130s. So we augmented them all with Russian airplanes. And these
Amazing.
were Russian airplanes, not military airplanes, but Russian commercial airplanes flown by Russian aircrew.
No kidding.
No kidding. No kidding. And all we had to do, and these vehicles are loaded with, classified equipment. So what we did was, for every Russian flight, we'd put a U.S. Navy soldier, a sailor, a Marine, or a soldier or a sailor on these vehicles to sort of watch, keep track of
Sure.
these vehicles and all their equipment. And I
So
think
one
we
per
had a goal
vehicle.
of, we were going to fly, I'm going to say 20 or 30 of them a day. And our guys did it. And I didn't think of that. I had a
Using
lieutenant
Russian
colonel
contract.
think of that. And he
That's
did
amazing.
everything. I mean, he was a pilot. He was an airlifter, brilliant guy. He got all of these vehicles certified for air movement, figured out how many airplanes we needed. And if we were coming up short one day, the colonel that he worked for would get on the phone and call, call the director of mobility forces in Al Udeid Air Base. And there would be a C-17 landed in Kuwait about, 45 minutes later to make up the difference.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
The Russian, I guess, contractors, were
Mhm.
they commercial contractors, or
Yes, they were. And they were
commercial?
flying former Russian military airlift airplanes.
Unreal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's how you got those MRAPs into
Yeah.
Iraq to
Right.
keep it
So,
safe.
so anytime we needed a sort of an injection of airlift, that's kind of what we did. Or we would get more C-17s in the flow or more C-130s, but that took some time. So
Yeah, yeah.
these guys were like the fire department,
So let's pivot countries to Afghanistan.
Sure.
We're operating a war in Iraq. We're operating a war in Afghanistan.
Yep.
Afghanistan's a much trickier place. It's landlocked,
Yes.
no ports, only 2 airports.
Yep.
Hard to get into, and the route through the south is through Pakistan and the Himalayas.
Right.
And so you wanted to create an alternative to the route through Pakistan and the Himalayas.
Yeah.
And you built a new supply lane from scratch into Afghanistan's northern
Yeah,
border.
we did.
And you,
And that wasn't a new idea. When I was in during the surge in 2007 and 8, our focus was Iraq, obviously, but we didn't not pay attention to Afghanistan because it was, I mean, the kinetics were largely over, but the Taliban and Al Qaeda and all their affiliates made sort of a comeback in 2006.
Mhm.
So, the kinetics and the attacks were picking up pace starting in 2006. And as early as 2007, probably 2007, the J4 at CENTCOM, an Army 2-star named Ken Dowd, who you probably have heard that name, he was my J3 at DLA. He said, maybe we ought to think about another route. And I sort of noted that, but nothing ever came of it because there was no urgency to do it. Well, at the end of 2008, when I'm trying to think when President Obama said we're going to put a surge into Afghanistan, much like we did in Iraq, but it was a plus up of about 30,000 soldiers. So getting the soldiers there wasn't necessarily all that problematic, or even a lot of their unit equipment, but getting the sustainment there for 30,000 more troops and all of the wherewithal to build the base support to support those, we had to do that relatively quickly. And as you indicated, coming through Pakistan and then that sort of 800-mile trip north to Islamabad and then a left-hand turn through the Khyber Pass into Afghanistan from the north or from that sort of the east was we were losing about 15% of our cargo to kinetic attacks, to bandits, to I mean, you name it. And what they loved was the insurgents anyway would love to waylay, a convoy of about 150 tanker trucks full of fuel and set them on fire. That was a spectacular public affairs coup for them,
Sure.
saying that they could sort of interdict our logistics at will, right? And it was a problem. So it got a lot of attention really fast, and I mean 4-star attention, Secretary of Defense, attention, and congressional attention as well. So the big idea was, and I don't remember who had it. Maybe it just sort of was sort of in its formative stages when folks started talking about it. But we figured out we have to get in another way.
Mm.
So, to reduce the risk to our logistics, we wanted to get a lot of our logistics out of Pakistan. Pakistan was like a bad marriage.
Mm.
At best, we were barely speaking to them. And at worst, we were at each other's throats. So that translated into a lot of violence, or they would just shut us down for 3 weeks for no apparent reason. They would concoct some ridiculous, Pakistani statute that we had violated, and they were punishing us by not allowing stuff to move. So the big idea was get it out, come in from the north. So the big idea was to do that. The problem was, of course, we had none of those lines of communications were set up. So I think we pulled the map out and Sharpie and drew sort of lines from Western Europe through Belarus, Russia, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and into Afghanistan from the north. And I was the J5 at Transcom. General McNabb was a brand new commander. It was August of 2008. That was his change of command. And he said, Mark, this is what we got to do. So I said, okay, well, great. So I went back and talked to my folks, and I talked to the General McNabb, said, hey, come and talk to me in about 2 days with regard to, what it is, how we're going to do this.
2 days.
2 days. 2 days. So we didn't have a lot of time, right? So all we could do was figure out maybe the 10 big things we needed to do. And I could tell as we're briefing General McNabb, he never looked like he was at any sort of displeasure, but I could tell we weren't ringing the bell with him.
Mm-hmm.
So after the brief was over, my guys left and he said, hey, Mark, just come here a minute. So he was a 4-star. I was a 2-star. I'd worked for him before, so I knew him.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a sense of his sort of penchant to get big things done when he was on the J4. So he said, hey, this is a pretty big job, isn't it? I said, yes, sir, it sure is. And he said, listen, I know when you look at this thing in totality, it seems a little overwhelming, but this is what I want you to do. I want you to focus on only 2 things. Okay. And those 2 things are you need to get permission from about 17 countries, and then you need to set up the network. And that's what I want you to focus on. I don't want you to focus on, 30 things or 3,000 things. I want you to focus on 2 things and keep your focus on those 2 things. And if you do that, all these little, these lists with hundreds of things on them will just take care of themselves. So stay out of the weeds and just do the 2 big things. And that was probably early September. And by February of the following year, in 2009, we had the first convoy. Actually, it was a train convoy that left Riga in Latvia and took about 10 days to make about a 3,000-mile journey into the north of Afghanistan through Uzbekistan. And that's how fast our guys did it. So needless to say,
9 months, you got approval from 17 countries.
it was less than 9. I would want to say it was between September and February. September of 08 and February of 09.
So 5 months. 5 months.
About 5 months.
About 5 months.
Yeah.
You built.
So I would tell you it was easy.
So
I mean,
tell us about it. How did you do it? How did you get
well,
permission from
well,
17?
there
Is
were
that
there
all
were times
each other?
there were times when it didn't seem easy.
Sure.
So the big help was the NATO ambassador did the negotiation with Russia,
Okay.
and but I mean, that the events had arrayed themselves in such a way that we needed it, and President Putin at the time was delighted to do it.
Mm.
So if you remember back to those times, we were in something called a reset with
Mhm.
Russia.
I do.
We had gone through years of bad feelings and all that sort of stuff, and we really did have a common enemy because it was in Russia's best interest to ensure the United States and the emerging nation of Afghanistan had a good outcome in the war
Yeah.
because they were a lot closer to the insurgency than we were, right? And they had already seen it spill over into Central Asia, and of course Russia would have been next. So he negotiated that deal. The deals in Western Europe were easy. I mean, this was, they were, either NATO members or, aspiring NATO members. And frankly, a lot of those small countries wanted the business. If you're in
They
Riga
wanted
or
something to.
Estonia or Lithuania, you're delighted to do that. So the way we dress this up talking to the countries and the country teams was we would lay it out in very strategic terms that it's in your best interest. And this, if you allow us to move this, we're not moving military cargo, so we're not moving weapons or, classified stuff. Our government cargo, building materials, construction vehicles, food, all of the stuff that's not classified that you need for a big force of 100,000 people to sustain themselves in the field. We want to give over half of that stuff that's coming coming through Pakistan and put it in your pipes.
Yeah.
So we'll be using your transit system, your businesses, all that sort of stuff. So there's an economic um, um, second order effect here in addition to helping out, the allies that are fighting an insurgency against the Afghan government. So it was sort of an easy sell, right?
In part because
Um,
you paid them, I guess. You paid them to allow the use.
we didn't pay their governments, but we paid all their
Yeah,
duties,
yeah.
and it was a big injection financially into logisticians in their countries.
Sure.
We had a little tougher time in Central Asia. Um, and it often required 2 or 3 visits. So I want to say we were in Azerbaijan a couple times, Kazakhstan probably twice. The toughest nut to crack was Uzbekistan. I think we were there 5 times
Why
to do
was that?
them.
Why was it the hardest?
A lot of it was this. It was interesting. We were given carte blanche to do this, and I don't know why, but this was a big interagency effort. So it wasn't just Transcom; it was OSD policy. It was the State Department. It was commercial industry, and they were delighted to let us do it because I think at some quarters they thought we were going to fail,
Mm.
and they didn't want to. They didn't want to have any responsibility there. Um, so it was me. It was a captain named Carl Weiss. Do you remember him?
I do, yes, sir.
Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Lonsborough, and then my aide was a guy named he's an Army Major Ralph. I don't remember his last name, but that was it. So that was the traveling team, right? So I would typically go with one or some of those. We would send. I would send the ambassador a preparatory email saying this is when we'd like to come. This is why we want to come, and we would like you to assist us in your efforts. And we got fabulous support from the ambassadors and the country teams. I mean, just wonderful, wonderful support. And I remember Uzbekistan got a little, and they just left us alone. So the ambassadors basically said, "Hey, Mark, I know you had said transit agreement, but that's going to take too long.
Mm.
Let's just do it with a diplomatic note." So a diplomatic note is a correspondence between the ambassador and the foreign minister in the host nation, and it basically says, "These are the terms and conditions of what we have agreed to," and that was it, right? So you would front load all that. And, I would go to see the Minister of Defense and their Minister of Transportation, and you'd have to play the genuflecting game with these former heads of what had been the Soviet republics, right? Because these were all Russian satellites during the Cold War. And after 1990, they were emerging republics. And I
Mhm.
use republics in quotes because these were basically the same strongmen that had been in charge when when they were part of the Soviet Union. But
Sure.
I have to tell you, the ambassadors and the country teams were just fantastic. So what I thought would be a daunting task, turned out to be relatively easy. So we skipped all the red tape, all the crap, and we found the quickest way to say yes. And the only reason Uzbekistan got all gummed up is this was the one place that the State Department decided, well, we're going to inject ourselves in this. So they insisted on all sorts of, no value added clauses in the dip node and blah, blah, blah. And so that back and forth took maybe 6 weeks. Meantime, we're waiting for this to happen. So I'm in Uzbekistan with the ambassador, a great guy named Dick Norland. He's an ambassador somewhere else now, but just, a prince. Um, and we get this, and we're going to go see the Uzbek minister of their foreign minister in about 20 minutes. So we get this hot wire from the Department of State, says that we want you to add this final clause.
Mm.
It basically says that you're going to, swear to God you're going to do all this stuff. Well, when you're in Central Asia, they don't swear to anything. They'll sign any dip note you want, but if the president decides we're not doing that, they don't care.
Yeah.
They just tell you you're not doing this. So Ambassador Nordland reads it, and I'm thinking, oh my God, now what? I said, Ambassador, what are we going to do? He says, I'm not doing this. That's what he said.
It's
And
amazing.
in the car went, drove to see the minister of the foreign minister. We had a wonderful visit, handshakes. And we may have had lunch there, a 17-course lunch with lots of vodka, backslapping, coin exchanging, and we're off and running.
All right. So I've always wondered about these lunches. I've heard about them, especially in those countries where there is a lot of
Yeah.
vodka. How do you
Mhm.
stay sober, negotiate a treaty, and also honor your hosts when they're serving you round after round of vodka?
Well,
Or
you have to eat all the food.
you eat all the
You
food.
know,
Okay.
you have to be a gracious guest,
Yep.
and you have to, you know, monitor your alcohol intake. Because I'm a cheap date, so I have a very low tolerance for this. But it's just them trying to be courteous,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
and they always were.
Yeah.
They always were. In spite of the fact that they weren't really republics, and it happened fast. I remember we went back to Azerbaijan really quick. Not really quick. We probably went back to Azerbaijan about a month after I was there, and we took General McNabb to sort of seal the deal because it wasn't sealed yet. And of course, when you travel with General McNabb, you're flying in his G5, and you land and, the red carpet comes out and everybody's there to meet you. Well, the ambassador was there. And I think we landed at 10 o'clock in the morning, and everybody's in their flight suits and we're tired, because we'd been up all night. Anyway, we get there. Ambassador Ann Durst, I'll never forget her. She wasn't a prince. She was a princess in terms of helping us. And she said, Mark, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Right to General McNabb. General, we got to see the president in 45 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
This
After
is the
having flown
president of
over you.
Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
Right. So McNabb, grabs his bag, zips into the head in the airport, razor blades, quick shave, puts his Class A uniform on. I put mine on. We get in the limousines and are whisked through the streets of Baku to the presidential palace, where General McNabb met the president of Azerbaijan with probably, I don't know, 10 minutes of preparation.
Unbelievable.
But General McNabb was also, he could have been an ambassador anywhere.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to go in. I sort of waited in the anteroom with all the helpers and, horse holders. And he went in there with, and it was just him, the president, and Ambassador Durst, and he comes out with an agreement. So with Azerbaijan, we never had any formal agreement. All we had was the president's okay. And he transmitted that to his minions, and voila, off we go. So we quickly built two routes, one from the north,
Yeah.
from the Baltics, that long railroad, and then we had another one that went through the Caucasus. So we had two ways in.
And so this had never been done before. Did you ever have issues with the railroad gauge, like the size of the railroads? Were they similar across all the countries?
Um, they were when you went through former Soviet republics.
Okay.
So we never had that
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah.
So we would have had that problem had we gone through West Germany
Okay.
or that.
Yeah.
So the gauge in the former Soviet republics was never an issue. And we would make a train that was maybe 200 boxcars long. That's a big train.
It's a big train. That's a real big
Yep.
train.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
within 5 months, you get agreements from 17 countries. You're bringing in sustainment into the northern border of Afghanistan for the first time
Uh-huh.
ever. What impact did that have? How did that
Well,
change things with
it
Pakistan?
sort of it got everybody breathing a sigh of relief because folks were worried. I mean, I had to go to talk to the. I think we had a joint session of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committee, and I had to go talk to them. Right. And this was we weren't done yet.
Yeah.
This was like in the early fall, so it was maybe October or November. So this wasn't a done deal. And people were very focused on this. Looking back on it, I'm thinking, no, they weren't. Well, yeah, they were. This was a big deal, and it had a lot of attention. So
Because
my
Pakistan had us
mission
by the
was
neck.
to.
They really had us by the neck.
Oh, yeah, it was tough. Our relationship with Pakistan wasn't great, and we were losing a lot of cargo, and we had to. And there was some pressure from the White House to get everything in ready to go by August of that year. And what you don't want to be is sort of the long pole in the tent or the last thing that's not done. So, the SecDef has to brief, well, President Obama, we'd be all done, but, Transcom kind of let us down.
Yeah.
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 You don't want to be that. You don't want to be playing musical chairs and you're the only one when the music stops without a chair, right? Plus, it just had to be done, right? So, I had to tell them what the plan was, what the routes were, and kind of where we were with regard to getting all the agreements. So I got asked a lot of very professional, gentle questions, and it was pretty good. And then so it was fine. It was
So I want to pivot there just for a second to your relationship with Capitol Hill, because in many of your
Yeah.
final roles as a 3-star admiral, you did have to either brief Capitol Hill or go before the House or Senate Armed Services Committee and be questioned. And I'm wondering, how did you do that? How did you do it well? What was that relationship like on camera, off camera? Just give us a
yeah,
behind the curtain.
yeah. When I was at Transcom, I learned that you need to pay attention to your relationship with the Hill. And when I got to DLA, I was that was in spades because we actually were. I think my biggest year, we were a $46 billion enterprise.
$46 billion.
That's a lot
of money.
46 billion.
It's a lot.
And that's a lot of billions, but they're sprinkled throughout the United States and many billions overseas.
Yeah.
So, you're dealing with businessmen who have connections to their members. Some of them are very robust, but they all sort of have a connection there.
Mm-hmm.
So what I found was you had to really pay close attention to your relationship with the Hill, and you did that through your legislative affairs person. So every week or so, I would have my legislative affairs person come in and brief me on the sort of correspondence that we got.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't necessarily write the letters, but what I found was if you didn't pay close attention to that, very often a written response to a member or a committee on the Hill would be either a really crappy response in that it was non-responsive, or it would be some bureaucratic nonsense. The Defense Logistics Agency takes great, great interest in your blah, blah, blah. And then you get to the end and you haven't given a good answer. So I would routinely read those. So I would always have a sense of any sort of coming storm
Yeah.
with regard to that. But again, that just required you pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we would be responsive to the Hill whenever we could. And if we couldn't, we would tell them why we couldn't.
Sure.
Like, for example, remember Belleville, Illinois?
I do. Yeah.
There was a boot company there that supplied, the Army and the Marine Corps with all the boots for brand new recruits. Now, once you were in, you could buy whatever boots you want, but Belleville was a big contract, right, for the Army and the Marine Corps. Well, at one point they became so big, they stopped being a small business. And the problem was when you're not a small business, you don't get to participate in small business only competitions or small business set asides. And we told them that when I was at DLA, you guys are getting dangerously close to becoming a big business. Now, with a big business comes all the benefits of a big business, and then all the downsides, which you're competing with the other big businesses, and they were having trouble doing that. So, they sent a letter to their member, and I don't remember who it was, that they were being treated unfairly by DLA. Of course, they left out the part about from small business to big business.
Sure.
So, so you had some of those, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I want to go
And
back
then
to
the other thing was, you never make a promise you're not certain you're going to keep.
hmm,
You know,
how did you learn that? Like what
well,
moment in time?
I mean, you want to be responsive, but you want to be responsive in a way that's responsible.
Yeah.
So I would, I mean, before we went there, if I was telling a member that we were going to do something, I wanted to be, 110% sure that we could do it and that we would do it.
Yeah.
You know,
Admiral, I want to go back if I can to the relationship with Pakistan, because when you
uh,
were the deputy commander of the U.S. Transportation Command, the United States found Osama bin Laden and took him out in Pakistan.
yeah.
And I wonder if there's anything that you can tell us about that moment, kind of where you were, what role you played, and if you don't want to talk about it, that's okay too. We can.
Well, no, I mean, we sort of heard it when you heard it. It was a Sunday night,
Yep.
about maybe 2200 at night, right? President came on and said, we got Osama bin Laden. So, I mean, General McNabb and I just knew that Pakistan was going to get shut down, and it did.
Yeah.
So, we weren't informed. That was a very close circle of need to know people that knew that was going to happen. General McNabb didn't know. The other combatant commanders probably didn't know. That was a very select few people, I am sure,
Yeah.
due to the the need to keep that circle of knowledge as little as you possibly could. But immediately we knew that anything we had planned to move through Afghanistan wasn't going to move through Afghanistan.
And so that northern distribution network that you had created came in real.
Oh yeah,
Real
absolutely,
handy.
absolutely. I mean, at one point it was. I'm not sure it was ever all, but it was close. You know.
So I asked you for an hour. We're at an hour, Admiral. Can you go 15 more minutes? This conversation's
Sure,
amazing.
sure.
Can you go
Yeah,
15
yeah,
minutes? Okay, thank you.
yep.
So I mean, you have this highlight reel. It's unbelievable, right? The surge in Iraq, the surge in Afghanistan, the drawdown in both countries.
Uh-huh.
Later, helping respond to Superstorm
Mhm.
Sandy and the earthquake in Haiti in 2012. But I wanted to sort of
Ebola.
look at it from a different perspective, and I wonder just
Okay.
um, is there a time when you either stumbled as a leader or inherited a stumble from another leader, and how you fixed it?
Um. Well, this really wasn't a stumble, but you had mentioned disaster relief and
Yeah,
humanitarian assistance.
yeah.
I was on the joint staff working for General McNabb. I was a 1 star. I was his deputy, and he was the J4 as a 3 star. And I got married right before the hurricane hit, and my wife and I were going
Hurricane
to.
Sandy,
No, this is Katrina. This is
Katrina.
2005,
Okay, yeah.
right? And we were planning on having our honeymoon in New Orleans.
Mm.
And I said, maybe not a good idea. Well, the only place you can sort of replan a honeymoon is on 10 minutes notice is Las Vegas, right? So that's what we're not big gamblers, but well, let's just go there. So we did, right? And we were there maybe a day or two, and Hurricane Sandy had hit. And not Sandy, but Hurricane Katrina had hit. And it was, I could tell it was going to be a bad one,
Yeah.
And I didn't have a lot of experience in disaster relief, but I had been through, in Charleston, we had a hurricane, and I don't remember what year that was, but that was pretty bad. And I knew this was probably going to be about 10 times worse. So I'm watching the news. So I asked my wife, Betty, I said, would you mind if we kind of went back? Because I'm sure the staff's going to be pretty busy on this. And she said, no, that's okay. So we cut our honeymoon short and flew back to DC. And sure enough, I got to the joint staff, and it was people pulling their hair out. The country just was not ready.
Yeah.
I mean, the Department of Defense wasn't ready. What we were asked to do, we did it really slow, or we did it reluctantly. FEMA was an absolute disaster. I mean, they just were not prepared. Their leadership were not prepared. It was sort of the perfect storm of readiness at every level of the government. leadership, preparation. The city wasn't ready. Louisiana wasn't ready. The federal government wasn't ready. And President Bush was reported to, were you working for the First Lady then?
I wasn't. No, I started working for her just shortly after.
Yeah. Yeah. And probably the worst part was from the president's perspective is he never went to New Orleans. He flew over it.
Yeah. Yeah. He flew up.
And that was,
Yeah. Yeah.
that was a bad move. And it was a bad move because when disasters hit, the nation expects the president to become involved.
Yeah.
Lyndon Johnson knew that during his experience at another hurricane and flooding in his administration in 1965 or 66. He just, stopped listening to his staff and said, "Get me Air Force One. We're going to New Orleans."
Yeah.
And he did.
Yeah.
He did. He was there, made $1 million. He got personally involved in that.
Yeah.
That's what it takes. So they often call, the president needs to be the consoler in chief.
Yeah.
But he needs to be more than a consoler to be really successful. He needs to take an active role.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't do that.
Yeah. That time.
So anyway, it was a disaster, a disaster of the disaster.
Yeah.
To the 10th power. It was a mess. We didn't do anything right. So what I learned was that the first thing is if you're involved in disaster relief, it's all about speed. Speed is the coin of the realm, right? And when in these disasters, you need to sort of think big, okay? You need to go big and you need to go early, right?
Think big, go early.
Think big, and go early. The other one is it's better to be half right and on time than perfect and late. And you'd be surprised how bureaucracies who are charged with speed, how bureaucratic they get. Because not everybody, but many people want to know, well, how do we know exactly how many MREs they're going to need or exactly how much water they're going to need? Let's wait an extra 2 days, to find out. Well, that's one of those things that perfect information has a value. And sometimes you want to have that because it's so valuable. In a disaster relief, it has no value because the cost of that is no action.
Yeah.
So rather than wait, an extra 2 minutes for perfect information, don't wait. Send everything you can think of as fast as you possibly can. That's it. And we did that in Haiti, right?
Yeah.
I was also on another trip. I was in Washington at a 3- and 4-star conference. Haiti hit. I just knew that, what was going to hit the fan.
Yeah.
So, I called up and Betty was with me. So we flew back.
Oh, my goodness.
We got there that night and the next day it was, a helmet fire. It was big time. So, and General McNabb was about to go to Afghanistan. So we very quickly figured out, okay, we have to set up the air bridge to Haiti. And then we have to send up a surface bridge. And the President Obama, I will give him credit, was probably the best leader in a disaster that I have ever seen.
Is that right? In what ways?
Personally involved.
Yeah.
Personally asking hard questions. Personally talking to the press. I remember in Haiti, his first press conference was standing right behind him were the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. So Secretary Gates and Secretary Clinton, who had canceled all their travel plans for that week to ensure that our government was responding appropriately. That was the guidance the president gave to those two cabinet secretaries, and that flowed down to us. So we felt that. Plus, it was just the right thing to do, right? You never want to wait. Then you also have to be very conscious of time, because that's the only thing that you can't buy back, right? So you got to make timely decisions when it's time to make them. And then you need to focus on the effect, right? If you need water, it doesn't do you any good to say, we got 8 zillion gallons of water en route. You need to figure out that supply chain from, where they distill the water to when people are drinking it is complete. So you want to focus on not the input, but the output. You want to make sure that it's all getting there. And you got to be roughly right. So McNabb and I think we figured out how many containers we would need a day. Because you got to size this thing, right? So I think within about 15 minutes, him and me and probably some really brilliant people came up with a number of 500 containers a day.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of science there. There was precisely no math. We figured, you need 1 million people that need relief. This is about what we think we got to move. And the answers, at a whole lot of judgments and Kentucky windage, we came up with the number 500, and no one ever questioned it.
So your goal is to ship in 500 containers a day of food, water,
A day.
and
Right,
supplies.
right.
There's no airport. Airport's destroyed. Control towers knocked over. How do you replace
Yep.
the control tower?
We flew in a control tower.
Tell us about it.
So yeah, so and of course, were you in any of those meetings we had?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you had Cory Booker or Corey Simmons writing down all the stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the Air Mobility Command people, an airlift or a pilot, said, this is getting a little dangerous here because we used to take 15 flights a day. Now we're taking between 100 and 150. And the air traffic controllers can't see both ends of the runway. I said, well, okay, so what do you want to do about that? We can continue to operate in sort of it's not a showstopper, but if you can do it, you can do it. Well, I think we can find a portable control tower. So we said, okay, what do you need? Well, we need, one full morning of no flights to fly this in on a big airplane. And we found an airplane that it would fit on, another Russian airplane. And we flew it from God knows where, and it was there the next day.
Unbelievable.
But that's the beautiful power of our government and the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
I mean, we're good at not everything, but a lot of things. And logistics, we are really good at.
So I want to fast forward the tape from Katrina to Sandy. It's about a decade later, roughly a decade later, not quite.
Yeah.
You are at the head of the Defense Logistics Agency, a $40 billion organization in charge of all logistics for the U.S. services, but also you can do homeland work as needed.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell us about the response to Sandy.
So when a disaster hits, there's sort of a hierarchy of who's in charge, right? And at the lowest level, it's the state.
Yeah.
So this was Governor Christie and his emergency management sort of apparatus, right? And then if it gets really bad, they'll ask for federal help. And the lead federal agency is FEMA, right? The Federal Emergency Management Agency. But FEMA doesn't do it all. So they call on different agencies and military services to do things that they're really good at. Well, DLA is pretty good at logistics. So we got a lot of logistics tasking. So the big one for us was fuel, food, and then whatever else came up. So it was very clear within a day or two that it was going to hit, probably North Jersey and Long Island and the 5 boroughs, right? So rather than wait for the last raindrop to fall, we said, and our deal was we have to have 1 million gallons of fuel every day. So about 4 days before that, we pressed activate the emergency fuel contract, right? Little teeny tiny company on Route 29 in the middle of Virginia. And I can't remember their name, but they were responsible to get 1 million gallons of fuel as close to the disaster as we possibly could. And they did that. So they had a network of fuel trucks, big 8,000 gallon fuel trucks, and they got trucks from as far away as Louisiana and Michigan. So as the rain is continuing to fall, we have this sort of this presence of trucks that are full of fuel, ready to, roll into the disaster area and our mission was to keep vital services going. So if hospitals lost their power, they had to have diesel fuel to run their generators. The police and the firemen would needed, regular, motor gasoline, gas, right? And we were fortunate in that there was a Hess refinery in northern Jersey that had their own power generation. So instead of having to move fuel from, southeastern Pennsylvania, we were right there on the doorstep of North Jersey. So we were very fortunate in that regard. But sometimes, sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not. The other thing we did was we converted all our companies that make MREs, the meals ready to eat that soldiers eat, to something called commercial meals. So if you walk around the grocery store and you pick up a Lunchable, that's like a commercial meal. So, people that are victims of disaster relief don't need a 7,000 calorie MRE. They just need something that to hold them over for a couple of days. So very quickly, they were making about 1 million of those every day.
1 million a day.
1 million a day. I don't know how that happens, but they did it.
It's amazing.
Right? 1 million. Think of 1 million. you made 1,000,000 things in a day. But if you see these factories, they are wonders of food service production. They're fabulous, right? So that was the initial part. The other part is that you never know what you're going to need. And all these disasters are just a little bit different. So what we needed there was a lot of dewatering capability and a lot of salvage capability. Well, all of our maritime partners do that. They do maritime, not all of them, but they do maritime salvage, a lot of them. So we got every pump that these guys had and sent that to North Jersey, and we're pumping out, basements of buildings and subways and all that sort of stuff. And these are the sort of pumps that can empty a swimming pool in about 10 seconds. So these aren't something you get at Home Depot. This is industrial, power. The other thing was that President Obama wanted the stock market open the next week, and he wanted some semblance of order, reset, because the election was that week, first Tuesday in November, right? So they wanted the ferries running, but piers had been destroyed, docks had been underwater. It was disarray, and the Navy knew how to sort of restore that, or they thought they did, but they didn't know who was going to do it. So I sent my contracting officer, a lady named Nancy Highball, she's an SES. I sent her to Norfolk to meet with the Navy 4-star there. He was the commander of Fleet Forces Command. And she went with her checkbook, and whatever it is they needed, she wrote a letter contract for it. And this guy was in awe of her. Where do you get these people? Well, we just grow them, and that's what they do. So that's the power of kind of setting the big vision and just turning your fanatics loose on a problem. They just figure it out.
You had a saying that I remember you saying a decade ago, run the ball down the field. And when you've run too far, or if you run too far, I'll tap you on the shoulder, but you just keep running.
Yeah, no, I think what you're almost right. I said, your job is to score touchdowns.
Yeah.
So keep scoring touchdowns, and I'll tell you if you're running up to score.
That's right.
And that's what they did. And they did that they did that in Ebola. They did that in Hurricane Sandy. They did it in, I think we had 3 big disasters, and then they did it in Haiti.
Yeah.
And we got really good at it,
So I want to ask you, if I can, a few final questions. The first couple are just around current events. And if you don't want to answer, it's okay. But I wonder if you can just touch on your view of our withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Well, we weren't, that wasn't our finest hour. It wasn't. And as a logistician, forget about the sort of security part. Just, if you're evacuating a lot of folks in a very short time, you need to have an airfield that's secure. So what really surprised me was the fact that the administration, and I'm not sure if it was the Trump administration, because they're the ones that negotiated the lion's share of the agreement, that peace agreement that President Biden inherited. So I'm not sure if it was them or it was President Biden's administration, but we should have never given Bagram back to the government.
Yeah,
because that is as secure an airfield as you're ever going to see. So we would have prevented a lot of that chaos that was just, we gave those airlifters and those few 1,200 sort of soldiers and Marines a near impossible task.
Yeah.
It's everybody who wanted to go just overran the place. So I'm sure we would have had a much better outcome had we kept Bagram, and we probably would have got more people out, because it would have been a much more orderly exodus.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was, again, that was not our finest hour. And I'm sure there were no shortage of people that recommended that.
Yeah.
But, the powers that be decided we weren't going to do that, and they made a bad call.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, I wonder, you're studying Washington in your post-naval as a retired admiral. You're writing your dissertation on him. And I'm wondering what you've learned from him that maybe you wish you could go back and tell your 30-year-old self.
Well, he, a lot of his writing would work very well now. When you take over, and you've been around long enough to know that it's when you're in a place that you're not real happy with, you're never unhappy with the company. You're unhappy with the company culture,
Mm.
typically, right?
Yeah.
It's just a bad culture. And I had, as a civilian, I worked for one company that the culture, I mean, it was a wonderful company with a long history of doing fabulous things. But when I worked there, their corporate culture just wasn't very good.
Mm. Yeah.
They didn't own up to mistakes. Um, they were inwardly focused as opposed to externally focused. They didn't listen to customers. They just thought they knew better.
Yeah.
And they thought they were somehow entitled to the business they were in, and you never are, right?
Yeah.
So Washington had it right. I mean, he was in his early 20s. He served in the French and Indian War, um, not in the British Army, but with the British Army. So he knew what right looked like in terms of, a military that had the right culture. you know and culture is everything. It's the norms, it's the values, it's the beliefs that people hold. It's how they feel about their job. And he saw that in the British Army. It was a professional military force, um, maybe the best one on the planet. And the army that he took over in Boston in July of 1775, 250 years ago, was not that army.
Mm.
In fact, it wasn't even an army. It was a sort of, a loose confederation of militia armies from the four New England colonies, right?
Yeah.
None of this sort of structure or hierarchy that you'd want to see in an army. And, the officers and the rank and file just didn't behave like soldiers. I mean, they did pretty well against the British at Lexington and Concord, harassing them the whole way back. And then they made a good showing at Bunker Hill. They were entrenched, and the British underestimated them, and they gave the British a bloody nose. But ultimately had to leave the field. So Washington took over in July. So it was right after that. And he just wasn't really happy with what he saw. And he wasn't happy because he knew at some point he'd have to face the British in a stand-up fight. His guys acquitted them well. General Knox dragged heavy pieces of artillery all the way in the winter from Fort Ticonderoga, which they emplaced on the Dorchester Heights, which put the British in Boston at risk. So the British packed up their stuff and sailed away to Halifax. And the following summer showed up in New York. And over that whole year, Washington, via his force of personality and his directives to his generals, his lieutenants, his captains, his colonels, and ultimately the soldiers, did a pretty credible job in whipping the militia armies into a fairly robust fighting force that, frankly, once the British got there, didn't acquit themselves well.
Mm.
In fact, Washington almost lost the army probably 2 or 3 times, and just by the grace of God was able to escape under the cover of fog or British sort of lackadaisical pursuit. But he was treated very roughly. So I'm not sure there's much I would tell him. He had the big idea,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, it sounds like you would, what you're taking away from him is culture, which fascinates me.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he was. Now they wouldn't. He wouldn't have understood the meaning of the word culture,
Sure.
right? So back then it was more like a guild,
Yeah. Yeah.
a guild of warriors that has sort of a common purpose, that holds their fellows in high regard, that is disciplined, that obeys orders, that does all the things that even an old army does as well as a new army.
Yeah.
So it's all the stuff that our young men and women learn in boot camp. They don't learn it all, but they're hitting the face with a bucket of military culture, cold water, the second they get there.
Yeah.
So that's how Washington. That's what he was trying to do,
And he learned
and
that
then sort of
from the
to
British.
create everything that goes with that. How do you keep people fed? How do you keep them clothed? How do you pay them? I mean, none of that was done. So he started from ground zero. In fact, you could actually say that he actually started sort of on the negative, because the culture that was there was a militia culture and it wasn't very good. So he had to break that behavior and then start from scratch and start building.
with no time to
No time,
no
no
time to
time.
waste, knowing that
Right. Yep.
the British were going to come back the next spring.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I'm amazed at and so not only did he learn sort of his trade, he developed sort of an implacable personality that he wasn't ever going to give up. You know, so I'm not sure I would have had the intestinal fortitude after, you know, 6 months of getting my rear end handed to me by the British. So they chased him out of New York, they chased him out of New Jersey, and they chased him into Pennsylvania. And when he started with 17,000 soldiers through people going home and casualties and losses to the British and, you know, 3,000 guys captured, he decides that in the dead of winter, he is going to cross the Delaware in a snowstorm and then march his ragtag 2,500 soldiers, all he has left, about 10 miles and surprise the British at Trenton. This is after 6 months of getting his rear ended handed to him by the British. I mean, I'm not sure I would have had the intestinal fortitude to do it, let alone think of it. But he did. And he was that sort of implacable, duty bound, never let him see a sweat guy, and he didn't have a lot of support.
if sort of thinking of the admirals that you mentioned earlier, would he have been a yeller? It doesn't sound like it. It doesn't sound like he was a yeller.
No, 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 no. I mean, he was a big. You had to behave honorably,
Mm.
and you had to behave like a gentleman. And he never raised his voice. I don't want to say never.
Sure,
He
sure.
got a little short with people when it was appropriate, but typically he was not a. He was just sort of a calm and steady guy.
So you're studying Washington. You've served under lots of presidents and lots of great generals and, of course, admirals over the years in your naval service and then joint service.
Mhm.
What do you think is the single most human or important trait that every great leader needs to have, Admiral?
Well, you need a couple. Operationally, you need to get the big ideas right. You know, you have to be able to have the wherewithal to communicate those big ideas to your people. So it's all well and good that you have it in your head, but if the people out there in the rank and file either don't know it or they just don't understand it, you're not going to have a happy outcome. Um, the other thing you need to do is oversee the implementation of all that. So I pulled out my leaders often have a real different idea about how to set guidance. For me, shorter, better, and it can't be more than 5 things. For me, I can't remember 3 things, but my people are a lot smarter than me. So this was my this was my 10-page thing, and it's at DLA, and it's mostly pictures, not a lot of words, 5 very simple things, and then sort of the principles. Remember the principles? General McNabb would always say
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
How he thought about that, and I took them all from him. We're living in historic times, doing things we've never done before. Make some history yourself. Push for smart things to do. Don't wait for the requirement for folks to ask. And this was his best one. Nobody knows this stuff better than us. I want you to act like it. You know, I trust you. Prioritize. Do it your own way, but get it done or ensure it gets done. This is your time. Do big things and make it better. If not you, who? If not now, when? Relationships are key. Build them and use them. Take care of one another. Keep promises. So that's sort of how to do big things, right? And the other one is just take a fanatical interest in your people, and you get paid off. The payoff is exponentially larger than the effort that you put into that.
Yeah. A
You know,
fanatical interest in your people.
fanatical.
A fanatic. Yeah, fanatical. Um,
Yep.
Admiral, so the last questions here. It's a hard time to lead. You know that. Leaders are juggling the rise of artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
global
Uh-huh.
war, and all the things. Global war in
Yep. Uh-huh.
Russia and Ukraine, and so on. What word of advice do you have for leaders?
Um, I'll tell you a story real quick. Can I tell it? Can I answer this with a story?
Of course.
When I was on active duty, I would invariably, as a 3-star, and you're the DLA director, everybody, all the logistics conferences, all the companies want you to be one of the speakers at whatever confab they're happening, right? And it would be an auditorium full of people. And I used to do it just because they asked, right? So I would do it. I would give them a 10-page spiel on what it was we were doing. And then the fun part was I'd always want to leave about half the time for questions, because that's really the fun stuff. I mean, they don't need to hear me talk, and I don't need to hear me talk. And invariably, somebody would always ask me the question, Admiral, what keeps you awake at night? Have you ever heard that question?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, right. That's the duty question. And
Yeah.
if you don't get asked that, you're lucky. And it's for some reason, it's always the last question or near the last. And typically, what you'll see leaders do is they'll pause for a minute and come up with this implacable problem that keeps them awake at night. And I would always say, you know what? I sleep great at night. And it's not because I'm not paying attention or I don't care. I sleep very well at night because no matter what challenge comes our way, either as the deputy commander at Transcom or no matter what challenge, I don't care what it is. I know unequivocally that the organization that I lead and the people that work in it are going to figure it out. So I'm not sure I answered your question,
No,
but
that's good enough. That's it. That's good enough, Admiral. So last question
yeah,
for you, which is, how do you, when all things are said and done, how do you want to be remembered?
just an old sailor who worked hard and maybe got a thing or two done.
Well, Admiral, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it immensely. I've learned a ton
Thanks,
from
Judge. It
you,
was fun.
and just, yeah, thank you.
I'm